A massive rise in the draft lottery helped land the Islanders their next number one defenseman. But will the addition of Matthew Schaefer help get the Islanders back into the playoffs? This is the 2025-26 deep dive on the New York Islanders. Hello, everybody, and welcome to team number 24 in my preseason power rankings, the New York Islanders. And the Islanders are a really fascinating team for me because I think there's a lot on this team that I really like, and there's a lot of the direction in which this team is going that I think is very fascinating, but it just depends on if this basically brand new coaching staff and management team can come together and put these pieces in the right spot, because they're in a very peculiar position in terms of where this franchise is at the moment. And obviously the massive jump up in the draft lottery definitely helped accelerate that process. Landing Matthew Schaefer can be a unit defining player and a franchise defining player, and whether or not he plays or not this year is still up for debate at this point. As of the recording of this video, he hasn't yet signed with the Islanders, so that is very possible that does happen before this video is released. I'm recording a couple of these in advance because I'm going on holidays for about a week, so I won't be able to record these live, so that's why I don't know if he's signed yet, but at this point he hasn't. And regardless or not, I don't think Matthew Schaefer would come in and be a franchise defining defenseman in year one. Those are extremely rare to have, but I do really like him as a prospect, and I like a lot of the pieces on the Islanders here as a team. But it's just about if they can press the right buttons, and if coaching can get them kind of beyond that next level, and if they can really activate the offensive spark in this team that really has been absent basically since the John Tavares era, right? This is a team that really has been known for, playing hard-nosed defensive hockey, winning games 2-1, losing games in overtime 2-1, and squeaking into the playoffs, with the loser point in quite a few situations. I know when that doesn't work, they end up just faltering out and missing the playoffs entirely. So getting some offensive juice back in this lineup is something that I'm really curious to see if they can do, and that's going to start with the coaching staff, because I think the roster is set up in a way that can take advantage of that, but we'll dive into that here as we keep going. First of all, let's look at the team overalls here. 22nd in offense, 29th in defense, 2nd in goaltending, 29th in special teams, and 24th in coaching culture. Obviously, the goaltending is the highlight of this team. Ilya Sorokin, in my opinion, is still one of the best goalies in the NHL. I think he's in the discussion for the number 2 goalie in the NHL, behind, obviously, Connor Hellebuyck, who's number 1, spoiler alert. But, I think that there's a really strong argument for Sorokin being number 2 on that list. But he's definitely in that next tier of goaltending. As for the defense, it's really a unit that losing Noah Dobson hurts, because Noah Dobson is a true number 1 defenseman, a top 10 to 15 defenseman in the NHL, depending on where you rank him. So losing that does definitely hurt, and they got futures back for obviously the 2 first-round picks they won't see come to fruition this year, or even in the next couple years, most likely. So it's really a wait and see game on those. Although I do like the picks, I especially like the Eklund pick. I think he's somebody that went a lot lower than I expected him to. And that was really the big addition here for the Islanders was those future picks, and that definitely helps the outlook of the team. Although it does significantly hurt their blue line for the current season. I think that's definitely the biggest area of need on this team. The offense is interesting, too, because I ranked them 22nd, but I think that there's potential for this team to really pop off offensively if given the right opportunity, right? I think we've seen a guy like Mathew Barzal really be handcuffed in his ability to create offense on his own. Bo Horvat, same thing. The season that we got from Anthony Duclair last year was awful. It's really been a situation where the young, the talented, it's not even young anymore, but the talented offensive players on this team really haven't been given an opportunity to shine. And I really hope that this is the year that can happen, because the team's pretty well set up for that to be the case, as we'll get into. Special teams is 29th. Again, very similar to the case on the offense, just a unit that really hasn't been given a ton of offensive ability. Their penalty kill has been pretty bad too. And coaching culture, 24th is basically just the baseline, right? Because Patrick Waugh is pretty new as a head coach, and obviously Matthew Darsh was just hired, so it's hard to grade all those guys, and we'll jump into the coaching culture now. And, I mean, Matthew Darsh and Patrick Waugh each get C's because there hasn't been enough time for them to prove themselves, right? Like, Matthew Darsh has had, an off season, and it was an off season that I think he did well in, but it really hasn't had enough time to marinate at all, so I can't, C is kind of my baseline ranking for all these guys, and same with Patrick Waugh. It's just more of a, I need to see more with this kind of new regime and see what the direction of the team is overall. As for the season outlook, they're still a rebuilder in my mind. I don't think that they're necessarily a tweener. I think that their blue line is bad enough that it's going to hurt their ability to push into a playoff spot potentially, although the goaltending could elevate that overall. But they get a C in that category because I think their outlook is better than some of the other rebuilders in terms of immediate talent on this team. And I really like some parts of this team, but we looked at their numbers last year, and 5-on-5 they were fine. 5-on-5 they were about league average, nothing too crazy there, but 31st in power play, 30th in penalty kill. Just a brutal mix of both sides of the puck on this team. Really not a lot to hang your hat on there, but you look at the goals for 19th, goals against 14th. Their expected goals for was a bit lower than that. Their expected goals against was pretty well in line with what they allowed. So, I think that their defensive play should be relatively stable because I don't think even losing Dobson is going to hurt their defensiveness that much. Although I think he's an underrated defender, but we'll talk about him eventually. As for the offense, you might see some negative regression in terms of the goals for, especially losing Dobson. But at the same time, I think that if you kind of unleash this offense a little bit and you take the reins off of some of your higher end players, that the expected numbers will go up, and therefore the goals for will actually go up too. So I do see some possibility for some positive regression in that sense if they play a style that's going to be conducive to allow those things to happen. But jumping into this offense here, obviously the biggest piece here is Matt Barzal, who I think is maybe one of the most underrated players in the league, although he was hurt for most of the year last year. And even then, you look at their offensive numbers last year, pretty good, missing Matt Barzal for most of the season. Bo Horvat's still there. I think Bo Horvat still can be a pretty solid second-line center. Anders Lee, again, another player who's very underrated. But other than that, some younger players too. Simon Holmstrom, Emil Heineman will be an interesting fit. Just picked up in the trade for Noah Dobson. Then you also have Jonathan Drouin, who they signed, who I think is a very sneaky free agent pickup for them. Anthony Duclair, you're really hoping can bounce back this year as well. So some interesting pieces. I actually think it's a decently well-rounded offense. It just needs that TLC to allow some of these guys to really pop off, right? I think Anders Lee could be better offensively. I think Jonathan Drouin could have a really strong year offensively. Anthony Duclair obviously can be better than what he was last year. Matt Barzal and Bo Horvat, though, kind of the two big ones I'm looking at. Just to see them really get an opportunity. I mean, even Cal Palmieri's got an offensive upside to his game. I really hope that we see the reins get let off these guys a little bit. And, I mean, that's going to start with Matt Barzal, right? Matt Barzal's underlying numbers are incredible. And it's really unfortunate that he's been placed in a situation for so long in his career where he hasn't been allowed to, fully utilize his ability as an offensive creator because of the defensive situations he's been put in. And even defensively, I mean, he's been a pretty strong defender for most of his career. 2 years ago was a rough patch in that, but overall, I mean, he's been a very effective two-way center, and it's really disappointing to see that Team Canada left him off their primary tryout list. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he can't make Team Canada, because we've seen players not go to camp and then make it later on. So it is possible that that does happen, but at this point, he's not on their radar, and I think he should be, because I think that, now I'm not saying that he should make Team Canada, but I think that he is a very good candidate as that third line center, guy who can play a defensive role but also can add a bit of offense touch. But that's besides the point. We're talking about the New York Islanders. As a top line center, he's absolutely still a first line center. And I think people just do not appreciate how good Matt Barzal is. And it's because of his point totals, right? You look at his point totals for his entire career, right? You look, aside from the 17-18 season, which was his rookie year with John Tavares, where he had 85 points in 82 games. I mean, he cracked 80 points in 23-24, which was a good sign. It was his highest goal score. It was his highest goal rate, his highest, first primary assist rate as well. and he got 80 points in 80 games. And the 20 and 30 last year gave me hope that he could get close to that again. And I really hope that a fully healthy Matt Barzal can get back to being a point a game player, because he absolutely has the potential to do that. And we really haven't been able to see him fully utilize that, whether it's been injuries cutting him off. I mean, he had 45 and 55 a couple years ago, and then 51 and 58 in 22-23. It's really about allowing him to fully, first of all, be fully healthy, which obviously isn't on the coaching staff. That's just on luck for the most part. But allowing him to truly be a dynamic, two-way center. And if you can be a point-a-game player and still be, really effective defensively, like, you have a pretty good player on your hands here as your number one franchise player. And that gives me a lot of hope for where this offense can be, and that really sets up the rest of this team very well, because it'll allow guys like Bo Horvat to take a secondary role and be super effective in that. And Bo Horvat's been a pretty good, chance creator, especially with the Islanders since being traded in. But even before that, although a lot of his goal scoring the year that he was traded to the Islanders was he scored like half his goals off deflections. It was crazy. There was a whole thing on Twitter about that. I think Jay Fresh really dove into it a lot. And it was just like a lot of his goals weren't repeatable because they were just like deflection goals mostly, which was insane, which are naturally harder to replicate, especially when you're having an outlier season in terms of deflection goals. It's the whole thing. Anyway, but I still like Bo Horvat. I think he's a really strong, secondary option. I don't think he can be your primary, forward, and I don't think that's really what the Islanders need to ask him to do, because you have Matt Barzal, and again, a healthy Matt Barzal kind of pushes everybody else down the lineup. And Bo Horvat is your second line center, ideally, puts him in a good position, because obviously defensively he struggles, but being an offensive creator is his primary asset, and you can place him with more defensively responsible forwards, or you can put him in situations where he won't have to be in defensive situations, especially with Matt Barzal and some of the other guys that we're going to talk about later here. So allowing Bo Horvat to really just be this offensive creator is going to be vital for the success of the Islanders. And again, that comes down to the system, right? You can't shelter a guy like this because it won't work. And I really hope that they allow the reins to come off guys, especially like Bo Horvat, to really kind of take advantage of that. And, the other guy in that system here is Anders Lee, who is super underrated offensively, right? Like, this is a guy with 29 goals and 29 assists last season, and, was putting up, pretty solid numbers. He was positive in terms of expected goals, too. He had the 14 power play goals. He was a really effective offensive player. It's just, his defense is fine. There's nothing insane about it, but he's solid enough defensively, and he gives you kind of this overall really useful, underrated winger who, I think a lot of people kind of gawked at the contract when he signed it, and obviously playing in New York, it's not like an offensive flashy team, but Anders Lee can be a very good secondary scorer that can put up close to 60 points, be a 30-goal, 60-point kind of guy, and especially with Barzal beside him the whole season. Ideally, I think that the 60-point mark is pretty attainable for him, and again, it's just more about allowing these guys to really utilize their strengths and really flesh out what they can be as offensive creators. Jonathan Drouin, it's very much the same boat, right? Like, we saw Colorado let Drouin be kind of that offensive scoring winger that wasn't going to play any defensive zone, minutes, and was going to just be allowed to be an offensive creator, and it worked really well for him. And I really think that if maybe you can instill some more, a bit more defensive game in Drouin, it would be helpful, because he's shown flashes of it in the past, but he's mostly going to be your offensive creator. And I think, putting him with a guy like Bo Horvat could be really fun. You could get some really dynamic, offensive situations from those two. And I really think that Jonathan Drouin can be what Anthony Duclair was supposed to be last year, and it just didn't work out. And it's going to come down to just letting the reins off him. And that's just kind of the story with this whole offense, right? And it's something that the Islanders just haven't had in their identity for a long time. And Patrick Waugh has done in spurts. He's been better at it than, Lane Lambert and Barry Trotz were, obviously. But I really hope that he can kind of let things loose, like very much like what the Canadians did with Martin St. Louis, where they just kind of didn't care about playing defense. It was just, we're just going to let the kids learn as we go. And now obviously the Islanders are a much older team than Montreal is in terms of like the core guys. But I think a similar style could be very interesting and could get this team, in the playoff hunt, especially with how good their goaltending is. And guys like Jonathan Drouin could be a big part of that. Now, Anthony Duclair, man, like, there's mild expectations for what Anthony Duclair could be when the Islanders brought him in, and he did not hit any of those, man. I mean, it was bad. Now, the power play numbers were okay, but the 5-on-5 has just been bad. He was terrible defensively. He could not generate offense at all. And, the Duclair that we saw in Florida a couple years ago seems to be dead. Like, that, he doesn't seem to exist anymore. But I think if you can get Duclair back to being like a league average, offensive creator and maybe a slightly better defender, he's still useful on a third line. If you can't do that, then it's going to be tough. But it's really hard for me to say that he's like unplayable because there's still like potential there for him to be fine. But it was just a really, really poor season, and he worries me because of that. And I need to see Anthony Duclair kind of bounce back, and I think being in a more limited role will actually help him. I think making him more of like a bottom six, like third line kind of guy is going to be beneficial because Jonathan Drouin can come in and take some of that offensive burden off his shoulders. So I think, putting him in a defensive line, maybe on a third line with Pageau, could help his development and could actually see him bounce back a little bit because taking that pressure off, being against, weaker defensive matchups. And Drouin was against pretty solid defensive matchups in Colorado. Like, he wasn't playing against nobodies. So, he's somebody that you can play in those roles, and that by default will allow Duclair to move down the lineup a little bit, and I think that'll be helpful for Anthony Duclair's numbers. Simon Holmstrom's super interesting. Simon Holmstrom is a player that I very much like. Now he's rated lower for me just because he hasn't played a ton, and I need to see it repeated more than just this 1 year. But I mean, offensively, again, like it's kind of the same story with a lot of the guys in this offense. It's very Philadelphia Flyers-esque, where they just have a ton of offensive juice in their top six, and it's just not being utilized fully. And Simon Holmstrom is another one of those guys that could really, really pop off. This is somebody that I think is a very much a breakout candidate going into his age 25 season. If given, top 6 minutes consistently, Simon Holmstrom can be a breakout star, especially playing with a guy like Mathew Barzal potentially. You could see a ton of really interesting offensive mixtures there. And my big concern is just, are they going to let them do that? And if you do, if you can get, the offense out of that top six, and you let them play, and you don't try to stifle them and make them, be shot blockers and defensively, super responsible players, then you can get some pretty good offense out of him. And Simon Holmstrom's definitely a guy that I'm super interested in seeing, and I think could be absolutely a breakout candidate for the Islanders this year. It's somebody I'm really keeping my eye on. If you're in deep fantasy leagues, Simon Holmstrom could be a really good late round pick if he gets those top 6 minutes. Obviously, if not, then you can drop him pretty easily. But I think as a really depth late round guy in a pretty deep league, he's not a bad depth pick just to hold and see what happens. I think it's a good bet because his underlying numbers point to him being significantly better offensively. And again, if the reins are taken off and Matt Barzal's healthy, Simon Holmstrom's super interesting in that sense. Emil Heineman has been talked about a ton among Islanders fans, especially because of the trade. He was kind of the one player that came back, the one immediate asset on this team. And it is true that he's shown flashes of being a good player. In Montreal, he was put in some situations and looked good. But and defensively he was fine. Defensively he was pretty solid, especially for being a fourth liner. What you expect from him. I think he was good in that role. But the offense just isn't there. Like, it really isn't there. And it concerns me when people talk about a player like this who's just like, he's a good, like, bottom of the lineup guy, but they put this pressure on him to be like, oh my god, he's gonna be great. He's gonna be this awesome, top six player kind of guy. And I just don't see that. Like, I think Emil Heineman still has a ton of room to grow, but I think like his cap is like being a good like third liner, and I don't know if I see like the next Arturi Lehkonen in him. Like, I don't think that the offense was there for that to be the case, and I don't know if the Islanders, a team that's notorious for not getting offense out of players, is going to allow him to develop into that. So he's good. Like, I like him as like a fourth liner, but like at this point he's not much more than that, and Islanders fans should need to kind of settle themselves on what Emil Heineman can be. I think that the real value in that trade was the 2 picks, right? Obviously. And I don't think that Emil Heineman's going to be this crazy. Like the Canadiens didn't have a problem moving on from him because they have a bunch of guys who can fill that role. Like that, like realistically, right? Like I don't think I don't think he's some irreplaceable asset in this trade. He's been traded in a bunch of crazy deals, by the way. Like there's like 4 trades or something that he's been involved in. It's crazy. His trade tree is insane. But like I like him, but I don't think that he's this like huge like game changer even to the bottom 6 in New York at this point. And again, like he still has room to develop, but I'd keep my expectations moderate for a guy who's basically been a fourth liner. Pierre Engvall, on the other hand, is somebody I really like. I've always liked Pierre Engvall. I don't like the contract. I don't like the 5-year deal for Pierre Engvall at 28 years old. But this is really a guy here who is an underrated bottom 6 forward. Now, I think that Pierre Engvall is more of a third liner. I'd rather him play on my third line. His finishing got a lot better last year, which I think is really helping his overall value. But a pretty good play driver, somebody who can handle the puck in transition really well, especially for a bottom 6 role. And a guy who can put up solid defensive numbers. So yes, he's doing against not great competition. Yes, he's not somebody that I don't think that the Toronto Maple Leaf Pierre Engvall crowd was talking about him being a fringe top 6 forward. I don't think that the offense is there fully, especially as a finisher. And I don't think that he's done it against high enough competition for me to believe that he could be a top 6 forward. But as a bottom 6 guy, a third, fourth line kind of forward, he is extremely valuable for what he can bring on the ice. Now, I don't think the contract is great. I think that paying him for the Albatross, I think it was a 7 or 8 year deal when he signed, is insane. But the $3 million cap hit is definitely looking better than it did 2 years ago, and it's got 5 years left on it. So I'm not it's still quite a bit, but for what he can bring to this team right now, he still has a lot of value. And I think Pierre Engvall is extremely underrated in NHL circles because of the hate that he got in Toronto. Unwarranted hate for a lot of it. And I definitely think that there's a lot of value in what Pierre Engvall can bring to the Islanders in that as a two-way, bottom 6 winger. I think he's very good in that role. Cal Palmieri, again, like it's the same story with most of the top 6 here. Really good offensively, not great defensively. And again, like I don't know why the Islanders continue to try to just stifle these guys, right? It's like you have guys who aren't great defensively already, so you try to play this really slow, low event team defense, and it's like none of those guys are like that doesn't fit their style, right? Like you have great goaltending, rely on your goaltending. Let these guys loose and try to score 4 or 5 goals a game, because the odds are that even with poor defense, Ilya Sorokin's not going to allow 4 or 5 goals against a game. So I think it's a pretty good bet to just try to like let these guys go and see what happens. And Cal Palmieri is just another one of those guys. There's not a whole lot to say that hasn't really been said about the other wingers on this team. But I like Cal Palmieri for what he is. It's just like they have to utilize him right. Like I think there's a lot of juice left in the to squeeze out here. But you just have to actually squeeze it properly. And if they can do that, then yeah, you could have another really good secondary scoring winger on this team. And again, the offense shouldn't really be a problem. Like I don't see a ton of issue with this team generating goals if they play correctly. The other guy here is Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and offensively, there's not a ton that I love here. Like I think his his value as like a potential second line center, I think, is massively overrated right now. But as a 3C, like he's not bad in that role. He exits the zone really well with possession. He gets to the puck a lot in the defensive zone. His retrievals are really good, and he's able to exit the zone with that. That's really good. It's just like his transition game is solid, but it's just the actual offensive numbers aren't great. Like he doesn't shoot a ton, he doesn't create a ton of chances, he doesn't create a lot of rebounds. And I think that if you play him with guys who can be more, that can have that offense, like a Pierre Engvall, for instance, or even, giving him an opportunity with an Anthony Duclair. Like I think a Duclair, Pageau, Engvall line is actually really interesting to me because you have two guys that can kind of make up for the offensive deficiencies in Pageau, but then you also have Engvall who's pretty usable defensively as well. So if that's how the Islanders decide to line up to start here, I think that's a pretty decent option. Again, those lines are from Puckpedia, so you can fight them in the comments. So, but yeah, I think that there's definitely value in what Pageau can add. I just think that his trade value is a little overrated right now, and if that's the case, then hey, maybe he's not an Islander, even by the time this video comes out. Who knows? But if the Islanders end up keeping him, I think he fits that third line center role pretty well for them. This blue line, on the other hand, I'm less optimistic about. Now, Adam Pelech is very underrated. He is one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL. Doesn't bring a lot offensively, but as a DFD, a pure DFD, Adam Pelech is still one of the best in the NHL. As for everybody else in this blue line, I'm less optimistic. Ryan Pulock has not aged very well. Alexander Romanov, I think, is overrated. I think got very much overpaid this summer. Tony DeAngelo is Tony DeAngelo. And then Scott Mayfield and Adam Boqvist, who I don't think I talk about in this, are fine. Like Scott Mayfield's a fine, sixth defenseman on teams, and Adam Boqvist is a fine depth piece. But as an everyday guy, he kind of worries me. Again, this is maybe where Matthew Schaefer slots in. As of now, I don't know if that's the case or not, as I mentioned in the intro. But if Matthew Schaefer is slotting in and you kick Adam Boqvist out of the lineup, or Tony DeAngelo or whatever. Although I'd probably go Mayfield and Boqvist as the two bottom guys on this team, just because DeAngelo's upside is intriguing. I think that does help this blue line out a little bit. Like I think a Matthew Schaefer, for instance, would add more value than a Boqvist would at this point. But I don't think it really moves the needle anyway on how I feel about this blue line, because I think Adam Pelech being your number one guy by a pretty considerable margin as a pure defensive defenseman doesn't really lend itself to have a ton of upside, right? Like your best offensive upside here is Tony DeAngelo, which that doesn't bring me a lot of hope for what this blue line can be. So like Adam Pelech is good, like I like him, but when your number one defenseman is a pure DFD, it's going to be hard to run a blue line around that, especially when you don't have a ton of offensive creators below him. But let's talk about Adam Pelech, because he's really good at getting the puck out of his zone. His transition game is phenomenal, and he's very underrated for that right now. His ability to halt rushes is also extremely valuable, and I think that's what he gets most of the credit for. But in terms of being a transition kind of player, his value is actually pretty good in that. And his cycle game also has a ton of potential there, and I think just being able to get the puck out of the zone, get it out to one of your wingers, and then be able to cycle in the offensive zone gives him a lot of value in that sense. There's just not a lot of offensive juice beyond that. But his defensive game is still one of the best in the league. He's again one of the best at retrieving pucks in the D zone, getting the puck out, stopping rushes, not allowing a lot of high danger chances against. And those are all things that are really valuable and really make Ilya Sorokin's job even easier than him already being a top tier goalie in the league. So Adam Pelech, I really like. Ideally, he's the number 2 on this team, and he was, but they traded Noah Dobson, obviously, with all the issues there. And that really hurts kind of where everybody slots here, because I don't know if there's somebody else that can take that offensive load off of what they're going to ask Pelech to do as a number one guy. Ryan Pulock is one of those guys, and man, 6.2 for another 5 years at 31 years old looks really bad. And now we have seen defensemen bounce back from contracts like this, right? We've seen guys kind of age back into their contracts. Drew Doughty is a great example of that. A guy who was looking really, really bad a couple years ago, and then has now kind of revitalized his career a little bit. Can Ryan Pulock do a similar thing? Maybe. But man, like last year was really bottom of the barrel, and if that is what we get out of Ryan Pulock again, I'd be very concerned about that cap hit and the term left on that deal, because he becomes an anchor on that blue line. His finishing ability was good, so I'll give him credit for that. That was fine, but obviously his offensive creation is non-existent, and his even strength defense has really, really fell off from where it was a couple years ago. So I'm concerned if Ryan Pulock is is this for the rest of his career, because that is not good for the Islanders long term. But if he can bounce back, then all of a sudden Pelech and Pulock, who were this number one pair a couple years ago that was super underrated and on these crazy good contracts, maybe they can get back to some of that being the value until Schaefer's ready to take over into one of those spots. But as of now, like, Ryan Pulock didn't show me anything last year that makes me believe that the bounce back is going to come, and going into his age 31 season, it becomes harder to believe that's actually going to be the case. Alexander Romanov, like I said, Romanov's fine. Like he's fine as like your fourth defenseman, maybe preferably a fifth defenseman, but as a fourth D, he's not a problem. But I just think he gets very overrated for what he is. Like, I don't think that going into his age 26 season, I don't think the top pair defenseman potential is there anymore. I don't even think like the true number 3 defenseman potential is really there anymore. I think you're looking at a guy who you'd ideally have as your 4, more preferably, a bottom pair kind of physical, kind of two-way guy, but not anybody that he doesn't really, wow you in any real category. Now his penalty kill defense actually, pretty solid, but aside from that, like he's just kind of okay. And I get you had to lock him up, but like it was a lot of money, and I wouldn't have been comfortable with that contract, especially from what I've seen from Romanov so far. And I think that there might have been value in potentially looking to move him and see how the league felt about that, but you paid him like a third pair, like a number 3 defenseman, and I don't think that. I think that the opportunity, the odds of him reaching that as being a good third pair defenseman, is getting lower and lower as his career continues to go. That's not saying that I don't, I absolutely hate him. I think as a 4 he can be fine, but because there's nothing that he does like that's particularly egregious. Like he's a fine defenseman, he's a fine defender, and he's solid offensively. So like he's not like a liability anywhere. So as a 4, like that's fine, but I don't know if he has the upside to move up into a potential top pair kind of role, and it seems like that's more how the contract was handed out. But he is going into his age 26 season, so there is a bit of room for growth there. But I don't think that the likelihood of a massive jump up at 26 is low. It has happened, but it's not extremely common. So we'll see. Again, maybe a new system. New philosophy kind of running the team might help get something out of Romanov that we really haven't seen yet, and was kind of the hope when he was drafted, right? So it was kind of a wait and see thing with Romanov, but I think that they took a bit of a gamble on that contract, and I don't love the potential return that they could get from it. Tony DeAngelo is, he's interesting. Offensively, still has a ton of value, right? Like I think he's still a good offensive defenseman. Obviously, the defense is horrible. You kind of know what you're getting there, but if you can get some good offensive play driving out of him, you get some good creation. He potentially becomes like a second power play guy. He's fine for the I mean, they're not paying him anything, so I'm not really like concerned about that. Like they'll get the points out of him that they need. You can kind of shelter him defensively, and I mean, obviously having Sorokin helps, mitigate some of that defensive liability that's there. I actually like if Schaefer does come in, Tony DeAngelo isn't one of the guys that I take out just because like this blue line lacks offense so much that having somebody who can generate a bit of stuff is actually kind of intriguing. But he's nothing special. It's fine. Like his offense is good, defense is awful. Kind of evens out to be like just an okay defenseman. Again, like as your 4, I don't like it. As somebody who you can put on the ice for 10 minutes a night and try to generate something. If you need a spark, it's fine. But I wouldn't ideally have him in the top 4, and like hopefully Schaefer's the one to take that top 4 spot, and then you can kind of move around, your other defensemen into the 5 and 6 slots. Finally, the goalies. Obviously, Ilya Sorokin, arguably the second best goalie in the NHL. David Rittich, I don't hate as the backup choice here. I think he's solid enough in what he can bring as a backup. We don't know about Semyon Varlamov's health. I have him rated slightly higher than David Rittich. I think I had him at like a 79. But we don't know what his timetable is. So I have David Rittich in. Clearly, the Islanders also don't know what his timetable is because they signed David Rittich, who I think is fine if you play him 25 games. He won't, he'll be fine, right? Like I don't see anything wrong in there. Ilya Sorokin is still one of the best goalies in the league, so underrated. Really needs, if I hope he gets a Vezina at some point because before he kind of dies out, because I think he could get kind of the John Gibson treatment where he just played in a weird market. But he did have the 2 Eastern Conference Final runs, so it's not like he hasn't been on good teams. But it seems like he might get the Gibson treatment where he's just a really good goalie on a team that nobody really cared about. And that might hurt his Vezina stock a little bit. But yeah, I think he rocks. There's not a whole lot to say about him. I think David Rittich's a fine backup acquisition. I don't think it's gonna be he's not what Semyon Varlamov was a couple years ago, but I think he'll be serviceable in the limited amount of games that he'll probably have to play. And there you go, just a bit more on Sorokin there. Even strength, really solid. His penalty kill numbers aren't great. Extremely good against high danger chances, and that's great. His quality starts is one of the best in the league. Excellent starts is more, by league average. But he had a bad year in 23-24. He had to bounce back last year. I don't see anything to say that he should continue to kind of move up and improve. And finally, the special teams. I mean, like I said, I don't love this unit. I think that there's a lot of really poor players kind of throughout it, and nobody that I really see having a ton of breakout potential, and that's kind of what worries me here, right? It's not like with some of the other teams we talked about where they have a bunch of young guys in there, and it's well, they're going to get better, right? There's really not a ton of that here in New York. It's a very it's an older team, and so I worry a little bit about where this team could kind of improve. But again, maybe, a more offensive system and a bit of a change to that could be helpful. Okay, so that's all we got for the New York Islanders. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, leave a like. Make sure to comment down below what you think of the New York Islanders. And if you think they're going to be a playoff team, we're kind of getting into that, the bubble playoff teams section of the rankings now. So things get a little bit more interesting from this point on in terms of playoff hopes. And make sure you subscribe. Get ready for the next video. It should be coming out in a couple days. Like I said, I'm on holidays currently as this is coming out. So if I'm slow to reply to comments, that's why. But I'm going to keep my eye out for that. But make sure you also follow the Instagram, which is linked down below, for more updates on both the series and on future projects that I'm going to be working on, because I have a bunch of stuff planned for during the season, and I want to keep content coming out. So thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.